Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to share with you guys my personal favorite Christian fiction authors, and hopefully if these are authors you have not heard of before or have not read very much from, you'll find some new recommendations. So I personally have struggled in the recent past with Christian fiction just because a lot of the content has been very recycled and just content that I see so much of in Christian fiction. It's just been used very frequently and very, very similar tropes. And I think I just got a little bored and frustrated and wanted something new. So I kind of started reading new genres and discovered some new favorites, but Christian fiction will always have a very special place in my heart, just because through a lot of the books I have read, I have grown closer to God, and I've just really appreciated the impact that these authors have had on my life. And so I just wanted to share my favorite authors with you guys and some of their books that I personally love. So I have 5 Christian fiction authors to share with you guys, but before I go over each of them, I just have a couple honorable mentions. So first off, we have Jamie Jo Wright, and I haven't read too many of her books yet, but from the 2 that I have read, I do believe she will become a favorite. So far, my favorite of hers is The Curse of Misty Wayfair. And she writes very suspenseful, kind of darker mysteries that seem like they're paranormal, seem like there's some ghostly element, but there isn't. And that's what I really enjoy about these books, is the creep factor and that questioning of how can it not be a ghost? How can it not be something paranormal? And it's not. And it's really satisfying to figure out exactly what has been happening in the story. And they are also a dual timeline, which is a huge plus for me. So we have a modern day timeline and historical fiction timeline. And I just overall really enjoy how she structures her books. And I would definitely recommend trying her out if you love mysteries, if you love a good faith message kind of strewn throughout a otherwise creepy story. It's definitely a very interesting combination, but I have enjoyed her so far and I'm really excited to continue reading her books. My second honorable mention is Jill Eileen Smith. And I haven't enjoyed all of her books as much as I would have hoped to, but the one series of hers that I think is extremely impactful and I absolutely adore is the Daughters of the Promised Land series, and this is book 4 in the series. So this book is about Hannah, and if you guys know anything about Hannah, she basically prayed for a child for many, many years, and her story is all about perseverance in prayer and patience and trusting God to fulfill his promises. And it's just a beautiful story, and I think the author did an amazing job of telling Hannah's story. And the other books in this series are about Rahab, Ruth, and Deborah, and they're all very, very impactful. So I would definitely recommend checking out this series. And my last honorable mention is Tracy Higley. So again, not all of her books have really hit the mark for me, but I absolutely adore So Shines the Night. And this is basically about the early church, and it has a lot to do with the darkness that was very prevalent in Ephesus. And the main character goes to Ephesus, and there she meets Paul, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful story of the early church and how they had to endure persecution. And it's just such a good story, and I highly, highly recommend trying this one out if you are looking for a new book to read. All right, so now going into my main list of my 5 favorite Christian fiction authors. First up, we have an author who is very special to my heart. I first read her books when I was about 12 years old, and they completely changed my life. And even though not every single book by this author is one that completely blows my mind, I still consider her a favorite, and I think I always will, just because of the impact her books have had on my life. And that author is Francine Rivers. And the first book I ever read by her is A Voice in the Wind. And here I have the entire Mark of the Lion series. This is the older edition from the 90s. These were my mom's, and she passed them down to me. And these books, again, I was 12 years old when I read the first one, which now looking back, I was probably a bit too young, but they completely changed my perspective on what it means to love God and to serve him, and the faith that our main character Hadassah has. And it's just, it's out of this world. These books have impacted me so much. And I think I've read each of them at least 3 times. I know the first one I read 4 or 5 times just because I couldn't get enough of them. And every time I would read them, it would just teach me something new about God and his love and all this series. I would also recommend A Lineage of Grace by Francine Rivers. I don't currently have the book on me, but it's basically about the five women from the Bible who are in Jesus's lineage. And they're each kind of more novella-sized stories, and they're amazing. So I would definitely recommend those ones as well. I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video, I tend to read more biblical fiction rather than like contemporary Christian fiction or historical Christian fiction. So 4 out of these 5 authors write biblical fiction. Just wanted to put that out there. So next up, we have an author who I would consider her to be one of my favorite Christian historical fiction authors. And I love the first trilogy I ever read by her. I'm just so happy that I discovered her through this trilogy, because I then read another trilogy by her that I wasn't the biggest fan of, but I'm so happy with these 3 books, and I definitely want to reread them soon. And I'm talking about Rosanna M. Wright. So the trilogy I'm talking about here is Shadows over England. So we have the first book, which is A Name Unknown. We have book 2, which is A Song Unheard. And book 3 is An Hour Unspent. So these books all take place right before World War I. And in the first book, we have a woman who grew up on the streets, basically, with a group of children, and they grew up having to look out for each other and depending on each other for survival, depending on being thieves, basically, for survival. And she ends up working in the library of a very mysterious man, and he has some friends in high places, some royal friends, and it's just a whole lot of fun. And I think the messages in these books are really beautiful, about healing and forgiveness. And I really love that the main character is technically a villain, and she's a thief. She doesn't have the best of intentions when she starts this job in this man's library. And so it's a very interesting perspective to be had. The second book is about another thief in that group. And then the third book is about one of their friends who he was also in this gang of thieves, and he meets this woman whose father is a clockmaker. And they're just so interesting. The setting is so interesting, and the characters are really well drawn out. And I would highly recommend checking out Rosanna M. Wright if you have not already. So I definitely consider her a favorite as well, and I just can't wait to continue reading her books. Next up, we have another biblical fiction author, and she is just such a beautiful writer, and I absolutely love how she makes the New Testament especially come to life, and that is Tessa Afshar. So for Tessa Afshar, my 3 favorite books by her are currently The Thief of Corinth, Land of Silence, and Bread of Angels. I just recently reread The Thief of Corinth, so I'll leave the video where I talk about this book down below in the description box. But needless to say, this is, I think, my favorite by her. It's absolutely amazing, and the characters in this book are so fun. So this one is my favorite so far. Then we have Bread of Angels, and this is about Lydia from the Bible, who was a maker of purple, which was a very expensive dye to use in clothing, and she would make clothing for nobility, basically. And so that's about Lydia. And then we have Land of Silence, which is extremely powerful, and this is about the woman with the bleeding problem from the Bible, and when she touches Jesus's clothing, she's healed. And it's such a powerful story. So Tessa Afshar just has this way with the New Testament that I absolutely adore seeing, and I'm always super excited whenever she announces a new book. So yeah, Tessa Afshar, highly recommend. So for the last 2, I couldn't decide who to say is my favorite, because I would consider these 2 authors tied for first place. But I think one of them I love just a little bit more. So my second favorite Christian fiction author of all time is Connie Lynn Cassette. And for her books, I had to bring all of them out that she's currently published, because I love all of them. So first up, we have the Out from Egypt series, and it's following the Israelites as they were leaving Egypt and afterwards. And so the first book we have is Counted with the Stars, and this one follows the Israelites during their time in Egypt, in slavery, and after they left Egypt as well. Then we have Shadow of the Storm, which is when the Israelites were living at Mount Sinai, and I'm pretty sure this also covers the golden calf part of the story. And then we have Wings of the Wind, which, if I'm not mistaken, and if my memory serves me right, is when the Israelites were wandering in the desert. And this has to do with their war with the Canaanites. So this trilogy is absolutely amazing. And Oh my gosh, I can't describe to you my feelings towards these books. I just can't. I have no words. And that's usually the issue when you love something so much, you just can't really describe why you love it so much. But highly, highly recommend this series. And then Connie Cassette also has a 4-book series, which is very, very loosely connected to the previous series. So we have the Cities of Refuge series, and I think I love these even more than the first trilogy. And with how much I love the first trilogy, again, no words for how much I love these books. So first of all, we have book 1, which is A Light on the Hill. And these books are basically during the time of Joshua's leadership over Israel. During this time, Israel had cities of refuge where if you had to flee for whatever reason, whether it was because your life was in danger or you committed a crime and you wanted to escape imminent death and basically go through like kind of like a trial system, the cities of refuge were there to protect you. And so something happens and the main character ends up having to flee to one of these cities. Book 2 is called Shelter of the Most High, and this is about a girl who is originally from the island of Sicily and ends up in Israel, and her life is also in danger and she's trying to survive. And another thing I love about these books is it's so much more than just bringing the Bible to life, but there's murder, there's some political intrigue, and it's just, they're so good. Like there's just so much more to these stories than a reiteration of a Bible story, which I absolutely appreciate. So book 3 is Until the Mountains Fall, and the protagonist in this one, rather than going to a city of refuge, she leaves the city of refuge where her father is high priest, and she makes some very reckless decisions, and those definitely come back to bite her, and this one is really, really good. And then book 4, Like Flames in the Night, I would say this is my favorite, and this one has a little bit of espionage in it as well, which is always great. So highly recommend this series. They are awesome, awesome books, and these spines are so pretty too. Oh, I just love these books. You should check out Connie Cassette if you have not yet. And then Connie Cassette's newest duology, I wouldn't consider it to be a favorite, but I still very much enjoyed these stories. And we have the Covenant House duology. So book 1 is To Dwell Among the Cedars, and book 2 is Between the Wild Branches. And this duology follows siblings who are originally from Philistine and they end up living with Israelites. And it's a very, very interesting look at the time that Philistine and Israel were at war. And this is also during the time that Samuel was prophet in Israel. So very, very interesting books. And my favorite Christian fiction author of all time, I just absolutely adore her writing style and the way that she characterizes people from the Bible. When I read Bible stories, a lot of the times the characters feel so distant and so not real. And this author just has a way of making them feel like the most real and fallible and imperfect human beings alive. And yet you're just absolutely astounded by God's love by the time you finish her books. And so this author is Misu Andrews. This woman, Francine Rivers has changed my life, but Misu Andrews has just opened my eyes to the beauty of God's word through her books. And so I'm not going to show all of her books that she has ever written because this video is already probably a bit long. But first off, I wanted to mention The Pharaoh's Daughter and Miriam. And this is a duology that is basically about Moses, if you weren't able to tell by the titles. So The Pharaoh's Daughter is about Moses's adoptive mother, and then Miriam is obviously about Moses' sister. And Miriam is such an interesting book because it has less to do with the character in Egypt as a slave, and it has more to do with her life when she was older and living in the wilderness with the Israelites when they were wandering. And oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. And Misu Andrews just really brought this character to life, and this one was also really, really good. A really interesting take on Moses's childhood, and so good. Then we have Isaiah's Daughter and Isaiah's Legacy, which are also a duology. And wow. So these ones are about Hephzibah, who was the wife of Hezekiah, and he was the most godly, righteous king in the Old Testament. And then this one is about their son Manasseh, who was the most evil king in Israel. And yeah, Misu Andrews just goes to some very dark places in her books and tells beautiful, beautiful stories of redemption and God's love of his people, and just amazing. And then my favorite Misu Andrews thus far is Of Fire and Lions, and this is about Daniel. And this is from the perspective of a fictional woman named Balili, and she had loved Daniel when they were younger. And Balili is a very embittered woman, and it's such a beautiful story. And Daniel and the Lion's Den is one of my favorite biblical stories. So, and this cover is just magic. Like, wow. Beautiful, beautiful cover. This author, she has a new book coming out, and I am dying to read it. I'm so, so excited for her new release. And yeah, favorite biblical fiction author ever. All right, guys, so those are my favorite Christian fiction authors, more biblical fiction with one historical in there. But yeah, these women have all had an amazing impact on my life through their books, and I would highly recommend each of the books I have mentioned, and let me know if you have read any of them. So that is it for this video. Thank you guys so, so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next video. Bye!